For all of you interested in finance and black markets, this chapter is for you especially. If you, a creditor, lends me money, you expect me to repay you with interest. I can either do something productive with the money you gave me, which will allow me to repay you with interest, or I can simply spend it on stuff to consume, which will make it impossible for me to repay you the money without an additional source of revenue. The man who borrows in order to spend will soon be ruined. A country that is growing richer will have more capital available. Smith says that there is therefore more competition between lenders, which drives down interest rates. Lower interest rates mean that people borrowing to start or support a business will be able to do so more easily. That leads to a more productive economy and more demand for labor, which will in turn drive up the wages and lower the profits. Low profits mean that interest rates will further diminish, since the profit is what businesses use to repay their loans. Now, Smith points out a flaw in the writings of Locke, Law, and Montesquieu. These philosophers argued that the influx of gold and silver resulting from the discovery of the Americas lowered interest rates. Smith, however, maintains that more gold and silver coming into the market simply diminish the value of gold and silver, since they're also merely commodities subject to inflation. That means more money is around, but everything is also more expensive, which are two effects that cancel each other out. Hence, the change is purely nominal and not real. Thereby, nothing really changes in the economy, which is to say that interest rates don't change either. Smith is a firm believer in the quantity theory of money, which states that the more money there is in circulation, the less it is worth. So pumping money into an economy should, according to this theory, have no real effect. Quick side note here, which comes from a 21st century perspective and isn't part of the book. I'll put the time when I return to the chapter here somewhere, so you can skip it if you're not interested. The view that the absolute amount of money essentially doesn't really matter in an economy is a very important characteristic of Smith and the classical school in general. This would later be challenged by Keynes and other economists. Today, mainstream economics has gone along more with Keynes on this one and assumes that the absolute amount of money does matter because prices are sticky and often slow to change. Back to the chapter. Now Smith takes what could be considered a libertarian viewpoint. In some countries, the interest of money has been prohibited by law. This regulation, instead of preventing, has been found from experience to increase the evil of usury. By trying to get rid of usury by outlawing interest, some countries have simply increased the rate of interest. Lending is still happening because a lot of people have the need to borrow. However, it is now happening on the black market. Because being a creditor is now riskier, creditors will charge a higher interest to make up for their risk. Debtors are thereby paying a risk premium that is essentially only there because the government outlawed interest. Government has, by trying to help, essentially made the problem worse. What government can do to combat usury is to set a maximum interest rate. This interest rate must, however, be above the lowest interest rates naturally charged on the market, because you still want to make it profitable for creditors to lend out money. The higher you set the legal maximum interest rate, the more people you will enable to get loans. The lower you set it, the less people you will enable to get loans, because creditors will simply not lend out money at low interest to people who have a high risk of defaulting. The risk here is that if you exclude people from the market by setting interest rates too low, they might go to the black market. If you set the legal interest rate lower than the lowest rate set by the market, you will have a similar effect to when we outlawed interest altogether. Creditors will stop lending out money and the whole operation will transfer to the black market. Smith, however, does argue for a legal rate of interest that is not too much above the lowest market rate of interest. In his mind, creditors being able to charge very high rates will lead to people borrowing who shouldn't really borrow. That will drive money away from the low-risk, frugal people who would employ it productively, thereby effectively reducing the productive power of a country. Smith brings forth a very classic example of how price controls can lead to a black market. Keeping prices artificially low, below what the market would charge, discourages suppliers from selling in your market legally, and they will do so illegally or not at all. Both of those outcomes are very undesirable. Smith looked at lending money in this case, but this argument can really apply to any price control, like wage control or rent control.